Shalom from Jerusalem. I'm Jonathan Hessen, and this is TV7's Editor's Note. And in today's edition, we will try and focus on the topic of discussion today, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Prospects, of course, for escalation between the United States and this terrorist regime, namely the Ayatollah regime in Tehran. There has been friction. There was an exchange over the course of this week between the United States and Iran, particularly when a Shahed 139 or 136 actually approached the USS Abe Lincoln Carrier Strike Group. According to reports, even though CENTCOM has yet to confirm whether or not it was indeed an F-35 that intercepted the unmanned aerial system or not, nonetheless, the United States took it out, and there was also another incident merely 3 hours after that, where the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Navy had a couple of speedboats, or speed craft as they call it, approach an American tanker that has also refueled American vessels in the past in this vicinity of the strategic Strait of Hormuz, something that, of course, is very troublesome considering the number of tankers that transit this strategic waterway. But a American Arleigh Burr-class destroyer immediately was dispatched to the area and accompanied the American tanker into safety. All the while in the Red Sea, we see also joint exercises between the Israeli Navy and American Navy, and many more activities that have taken place in this region over the course of the last 24, 48, 72 hours. A streamline of various American assets are entering into the region, while negotiations, are taking place behind the scenes. There are a lot of question marks on whether or not it's going to be successful, and we're going to touch on this quite in depth. We're focusing initially on operational, tactical, and the strategic. We're going to zoom all out to do just that. I am delighted to be joined by my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Marshall Billingslea, formerly the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, an Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for countering terror financing, and a whole host of senior positions. Currently, of course, a senior fellow at Hudson Institute. It's a pleasure having you with me here for this program today, Marshall.
Great to be with you, Jonathan.
Thank you for joining. Let's start with the obvious, a buildup of a lot of military assets, messaging the Iranians we are expecting to see change, whether it's going to be the easy way, diplomatically speaking. I'm not sure that it's necessarily the easier way, or the hard way, which is a military kinetic strike with the objectives quite obscure at this point.
Indeed, the Iranian regime is attempting to do with President Trump what they've seen Vladimir Putin do with President Trump, what they're watching Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela do with President Trump, which is play for time. They are stalling. And I believe that the demands that the Trump administration has made of the Iranians, which are very, very consistent, by the way, with the requirements that we laid out in the first Trump administration for Iran, are not going to be seriously met by the Iranian regime. And therefore, for a variety of reasons, I do think that military strikes against the Ayatollah and the regime are highly probable. Let's remember that President Trump was highly critical of Barack Obama and his red line in Syria, which he failed to honor. And President Trump called it weakness and irresolution after Obama did that. And Trump himself responded quite forcefully when the Assad regime used chemical weapons against the Syrian people. President Trump drew a red line for the Ayatollah and made crystal clear that the U.S. was locked and loaded. The Ayatollah ignored that red line and stepped right across it. Then President Trump urged the protesters to continue to go out in the street, and he said help was coming. So you really can't say those type of things without intending ultimately to enforce that red line. And I think that's what the president intends to do.
As people who've been in the field, obviously, every soldier remembers that moment where you hear in your radio that help is coming or this or that is going to happen, and then you wait 1 hour after another, and it just is delayed after delay after delay. The frustration must be immense right now in the Iranian streets, and if we want to see some type of regime change, these delays cannot be perpetual. Something needs to happen sooner or later. Now, obviously, the Trump administration is keen on utilizing this time to further bolster the assets in the region and the U.S. CENTCOM AOR. But nonetheless, looking deeper into the diplomatic dynamics, what America right now is demanding is, in effect, regime change via diplomacy. And if that doesn't go through, it's going to happen differently.
That's exactly right. You can't require the mullahs in Tehran to forswear support for terrorist groups around the region, which they have so painstakingly constructed and funded and armed, without, in essence, requiring a fundamental abandonment of everything that the regime stands for, which is the export of the revolution. So these conditions, these requirements that have been laid out are in effect tantamount to a change in regime behavior, which is in effect a change in the regime.
Let's
Which is, by the way, Jonathan, that's precisely why it's not going to happen.
Right. There is growing skepticism amongst the community of experts, particularly those who have somewhat access into the system or have been seating on the hot seats like yourself, taking a proactive part in those type of negotiations and other activities related to policy. But let's go a little bit broader into this issue. Strategically speaking, where do we find Iran within the scope of American national security strategy, despite the fact that the security strategy today, published a couple of weeks ago, is more of a doctrine that is establishing the boundaries of some type of approach towards the various complexities in the global stage. But going deeper into, again, the Iranian file, what are we to take into consideration when thinking about the issue at hand?
Iran poses a unique set of problems for the United States and our allies, similar, by the way, to Venezuela, in the sense that both of those countries have spread a spider web of of illicit actions, illicit actors, terrorism. In the case of Venezuela, the narcotics trafficking into the United States, but also serving as a base for Hezbollah and Hamas in Venezuela. Iran, of course, with tendrils throughout the Middle East and in Latin America, fomenting unrest, arming terrorist groups like the Houthis, obviously Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iraqi militias, and so on. And so, as you see the Trump administration, at maybe not at the tactical level, but at the operational level, the Trump administration is rolling these networks back to the source. They're doing that in Venezuela, and I think they intend to do that in the case of Iran. Iran poses also like Venezuela, an additional challenge to the extent that they are also deeply intertwined with Russia and with Russian aggression against Ukraine. So, in essence, it appears that the Trump administration is working the national security threats on a gradual, from the outside in, compressing inward on the real major problems, which are, of course, Russia and China.
Now, when I think a web, I always think about Samuel Huntington, the web, the spider web that he portrays in his book Clash of Civilizations, and ultimately the complexities related to Iran play a very illustrative type of role within this context. But you know, uh, let's talk about strategy for a second, because um, if we look at Henry Kissinger and the approach that he always undertook, and we know that President Trump and his administrations were always very tentative to what Kissinger had to say, here specifically, um, Kissinger was always very skeptical about whether or not the Ayatollah regime was an actor that we could even negotiate with, let alone operate with, and these type of approaches were not taken into account in recent years. But looking at his broader geostrategic approach, it was always about decoupling Russia from China. Naturally, taking Iran out of the equation could serve this type of approach very strongly, something that both Chinese and the Russians know full well. We saw obviously also the meeting between Xi Jinping and President Putin this week that also discussed the Iranian issue at length, and we're talking here about their aspiration to see their Middle Eastern, Central Asian type of ally preserved to a large degree at the expense of the United States, since it seems like both Beijing and Moscow are losing grip on many locations, not just in our broader Middle East territories, but around the world.
That's correct. Although the idea of splitting Russia from China, while laudable, it's a very, very difficult task. I have sat across the table from the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov. I have briefed him on what China is doing with regard to its nuclear weapons buildup, for instance. I have showed him maps of Russian territory that the Chinese Communist Party believes were unfairly ceded to China through various treaties. And it really just doesn't seem to make a dent. I know the Russians don't trust the Chinese. I know the Russians are concerned about becoming a vassal state to China, which is clearly what Xi Jinping intends. The Russian economy now is completely dominated by the Chinese. Russia is completely dependent upon China for imports that they can't get because of export controls and sanctions from the West, and for the commodities necessary to fuel the Russian war machine as it continues its butchery against the Ukrainian people. Separating the Russians, therefore, from the Chinese, or vice versa, separating the Chinese from the Russians, is a pretty tall order at this stage.
With that being said, if we look deeper into this complexity, naturally we do need to take into account also the fact that the Russians are not keen on being a secondary actor. And in this context, they are. I had a conversation, I think it was about a year ago, with a good friend who happened to be a European chief of intelligence of a European ally. And he told me that when he visited China, in a room where they invited all kind of different dignitaries, there were pictures of the commander of Wagner. And when he asked them about that, they said, "Oh, he's a frequent guest." So naturally, they also have a lot of relations to go deep within the various intricacies related to those type of engagements, and Moscow and Beijing, it's an unholy alliance that ultimately their goal is bringing down the West.
It is. It's even more perfidious than that. It's a desire to completely rewrite the international order that the United States, at great sacrifice, established following the Second World War. And they chip away at it in a myriad of manners, whether it's hybrid warfare, whether it's subversion in the information domain, whether it is physical actions that contravene longstanding international law, like the construction of artificial islands in the South China Sea that have no right to be there, or infringement on the Philippine exclusive economic zone and Philippine fishing vessels with the so-called Chinese Coast Guard. If you look across the board, it's an effort to rewrite. I mean, Xi and Putin do want a rules-based order, but they want it ordered on the basis of their rules, which is something that no one in our democracies, no one in Israel, no one in the United States would ever want to live under.
Well, those who do or proclaim to want something like that are usually youngsters who have no idea what they're talking about and have not experienced any type of totalitarian environments in their lifetime. But unfortunately, this type of sentiments has become a plague in Western societies throughout Europe, the United States, on university campuses, many of which have been heftily invested into by those same totalitarian regimes who seek to alter the rules-based order on a global scale. But let's zoom in a little bit now that we established some parameters to the complexities at hand. Um, Iran still is trying to salvage whatever it can from its proxies. The Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic, has warned that in the event of an American attack against his regime, there's going to be a regional war. Not something new. Over the last 2 years, obviously, Israel has been waging that war. But now bringing in the United States into the equation, are we expected to see a true decisive moment in which we would like to see some type of paradigm shift occur?
The Ayatollah is a fanatic. He goes to bed at night and he wakes up in the morning devoted to the export of of Twelver Islam, of Shiism. That's what he's all about. That's what his regime is all about, and he is not going to change his stripes, as they say. I do find it a bit ironic that he is threatening a wider regional conflict on Twitter, which of course he bans all Iranians from using with the rolling internet blackouts that they've imposed while he's hiding in a bunker somewhere. I think let's take this geriatric fanatics tweets at face value. But he should be concerned because the flow of forces into the region continues. The United States, because the United States pulled the Ford carrier group to deal with Maduro in Venezuela, it took a little while to replace that carrier with the Lincoln. The Lincoln is now in place, and a number of aviation assets are moving into the region. President Trump is not stalling. He is, I think, simply doing what is prudent, which is waiting for all of the necessary pieces on the chessboard to be in place so that his military can come to him with options for how to deal with the fact that the fanatics in Tehran have just finished slaughtering tens of thousands of Iranian people. The rage in Iran must be immeasurable. Something has fundamentally changed here with the Iranian people. These protests were broader and deeper than any we have seen since the revolution. I mean, the protests in 2022 were significant. They were in about 150 cities. We're talking about protests now in 2026, late 25, that stretched for weeks on end in more than 200 Iranian cities in every single province. So this regime is brittle. As we saw with Assad, these kinds of regimes can fall very, very rapidly. I'm sure Washington is grappling with the question of what comes next, but clearly some type of punitive action for the butchery and for crossing the red line is definitely, I think, in order and likely coming.
I will say that the sacrifice of the Iranian people is commendable. I mean, naturally, nobody wants to see the tenth of thousands of Iranians being butchered by this brutal regime. But right after the 12-day war, which was sparked on on June 13th, and just to remind you that I'm sure you know, Marshall, but a day before June 13th, President Trump came out and said that they're about to negotiate. So there was something that triggered that timing where Israel received the green light, it just went for it, and naturally Israel does not move on something like this without the green light from the United States, to say it mildly. And within all those various days that occurred, the state to which the Ayatollah regime has found itself, being battered, being completely naked defensive wise, has really created pockets of vacuum throughout Iran. And it took them a couple of weeks after those 12 days to try and resecure the regime. Now, if we would have seen massive protests at that point in time, I'm not sure the Ayatollah regime would have survived necessarily. But your thoughts
That's
on that?
absolutely right. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I wish that the 12-day war had lasted maybe for 15 or 16 days.
Right.
It was unfortunately cut short. Israel was executing a very clear strategy, targeting the apparatus that keeps the Ayatollah in power. If you remember, during those 12 days, it wasn't, I mean, the U.S., of course, struck the nuclear sites after Israel had significantly degraded both the medium range ballistic missile launch sites and the air defenses. But Israel had then turned towards striking Basij headquarters, striking the repression apparatus that the mullahs use to keep control of the population. So I believe that the state of Israel is in a position to advise the United States on that strategy, on what their thinking was. I believe it was sound thinking, and it was being methodically executed. The final step, of course, is removal of the Ayatollah himself. The United States, with Maduro's capture, has clearly demonstrated that we have the ability to do such things when necessary. So the regime should tread very carefully. They really should abandon their ways and agree to the deal that's before them. Of course, we don't think they will, and therefore, what's coming, I think, could be substantial.
I I remember quite vividly the more than 220 aircraft in the skies of Iran, with President Trump calling them back on the 12th day. And that was a cause for much frustration since naturally a lot of Iranian people were banking on those strikes against the Basij and the other uh, suppressing apparatus, as you put it, of the Ayatollah regime. But uh, there's still much to be done, and one of the things that I ask myself, and it's a very significant question. Naturally, Israel will join the fight in the event that the Iranians strike. But why wouldn't the United States seek Israeli assistance and that of other allies and partners in bringing about a decisive strike against the Islamic Republic as somewhat of an intimate coalition of sorts that would bring about an abrupt end to this terror regime in Tehran?
I think the United States likely has solicited allied support. I believe there's a lot going on behind the scenes. I note, remember when I talked about how President Trump retaliated against Assad for the chemical gassing of the Syrian people? Both the British and the French participated in those strikes. I note that the Royal Air Force, the UK's Air Force, has deployed Typhoon fighters now to Qatar. So allies are in the vicinity. And of course, Israel would, I think, inevitably need to play a significant role. Obviously, Israeli intelligence is exquisite. Operational reach has been demonstrated with the targeted hit on Hamas leadership staying in the Ayatollah's compound in Tehran, for instance, if one recalls. And Israel has a vested interest in doing so. Remember, just shortly before the protests erupted, Prime Minister Netanyahu was at Mar-a-Lago. He was believed to have been speaking specifically to the administration about the urgent need to target Iran's replenishment of its ballistic missile inventory, particularly the shorter and medium range missile systems, which Iran was launching in salvos against Israel. So that's definitely for the state of Israel, I think, a major priority. It should also be for the United States. I'm sure it is, because those very same missiles have been used in the past to attack U.S. Military airfields and air bases, and have, in fact, caused traumatic brain injury to U.S. soldiers in the past. So if the United States goes, I believe Israel goes with it.
And it should finish the job. And just last weekend, we had Major General Beendale, the commander of the IDF Intelligence Directorate, join the IDF Chief of General Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, to meet with their counterparts in the United States and other senior Pentagon officials and White House officials at that to really coordinate more. They came back, obviously, and held their own security cabinet meetings here with Prime Minister Netanyahu, director of the Mossad, David Barnea, and others, to really dive deeper into what it all means to collaborate and coordinate deeply. A joint approach to the Islamic Republic of Iran. And naturally, if we listen very carefully to the remarks by all those who were involved in the last operation against Iran, Operation Rising Lion and Midnight Hammer, we hear both the Chief of General Staff here in Israel as well as the director of Mossad praising both the commander of Central Command, the director of the CIA, and the CIA at large for being instrumental in Israel's capacity to execute such a flawless war against the Islamic Republic then. And I'm sure that this collaborative effort will persist also today, together with the Brits and other European allies, including the Germans, by the way, who are also very instrumental in many aspects. This is all the time that we have for today. Marshall, in one sentence, closing, what would you like to state?
I would note that that close collaboration with the state of Israel and the IDF was greatly enabled by President Trump's decision in his first administration to assign U.S. Central Command the responsibility of working with Israel, really fixing a long-standing seam in our relationship. So the ability to synchronize and collaborate is very much there. And I think that is of great value to the United States, and it's of vital importance to the Israeli people.
Mr. Marshall Billingslea, thank you very much for all of your valuable time and valuable insights.
Thank you, Jonathan. Great to be with you.
It's great to have you with us, and I'd like to thank you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.